After I refused to give my inheritance to my mother, she invited me to a family meeting. When I arrived, I'm Sarah. I'm 28 years old, and last month my grandfather left his entire fortune of over $3 million to me. The day after the funeral, my mother Linda demanded that I transfer everything to her. When I refused, hell broke loose. This morning, I received a message about an urgent family meeting. Upon entering my childhood home, I froze. My mother, my siblings, stepfather, and two men in expensive suits were staring at me. "Sarah," said my mother with a cold smile, "meet our consultants." I wasn't prepared for what happened next. My grandfather Robert wasn't just family. He was my hero. While most children had pop star posters on their walls, I had a framed photo of my grandfather proudly standing in front of his first hardware store. He built his business from nothing, starting with a small loan and transforming it into a network of 15 stores throughout the state of Texas. "Nothing worth having is easy, Sarah," he would tell me, his voice always carrying that perfect mixture of tenderness and wisdom. My mother Linda, on the other hand, never understood the value of hard work. As grandfather's only daughter, she grew up expecting everything to be handed to her on a silver platter. Even as a child, I noticed how she would roll her eyes whenever he talked about building character through adversity. My earliest memories include her explosive shopping sessions, the living room overflowing with bags bearing designer logos, followed by whispered discussions between her and my grandfather about money. When I was 12 years old, our family finances were a disaster. Mom changed credit cards like changing clothes, exhausting one before moving on to the next. My stepfather Kevin allowed her, partly because he benefited from her spending, and partly because confronting her led to explosive fights. They refinanced our house twice before I finished high school. Meanwhile, Grandpa paid special attention to me. He noticed how I would stay in his office during family meetings, fascinated by the account books and business reports scattered across the table. When I was 13, he started taking me to his main store on Saturdays. "You have a good head for business, girl," he said one afternoon while I helped him review inventory reports. "You notice things others don't see." Those Saturdays became sacred. He taught me how to analyze profit margins, negotiate with suppliers, and most importantly, how to treat employees with respect. "Your business is only as good as the people who run it when you're not there," he used to say. When college time came, Grandpa offered to pay my tuition in full, but my mother intercepted. Suddenly, she was calling him daily, complaining about my sister Emma's medical bills and my brother Tyler's needs. The money for my education mysteriously became family funds. Instead, I took student loans and worked part-time at a local bookstore. Grandpa would visit me there, pretending to browse the business section while slipping me envelopes of money. "Don't tell your mother," he would whisper. "This is between us." As his health began to decline, our conversations became more serious. I was 26 when he was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. During a hospital visit, he squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "I've watched how you handle money, Sarah," he said. "You're the only one in this family who understands its value." "Linda," he sighed heavily, "your mother never understood that money isn't just for spending. It's responsibility. It's security. It's opportunity." He looked at me with intense clarity. "I've made arrangements. You'll be taken care of. When the time comes, there will be pressure. Maintaining your position won't be easy." In his final months, he shared stories about my mother's teenage years, how she would steal from his wallet, forge his signature on checks, and once emptied a savings account he had created for her. "I failed her somehow," he confessed during our last real conversation. "I gave too much, perhaps, or too little of what really mattered." He squeezed my hand. "But you, Sarah, you became perfect." A week later, he fell into a coma. 3 days after, surrounded by family, Robert James Mitchell drew his last breath. I felt a part of me leave with him. The reading of the will took place 2 weeks after the funeral. We gathered in Mr. Harrison's office, a wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and old books. My mother arrived dressed in designer black, her eyes hidden behind large sunglasses. Emma and Tyler sat on either side of her, with Kevin hovering protectively behind them. I sat alone on the other side of the table. Mr. Harrison began reading. The first few minutes covered small bequests, charitable donations, a generous pension for his longtime housekeeper. Nothing surprising. Then came the bombshell. "And to my granddaughter, Sarah Nicole Mitchell, I leave the remainder of my estate, including my business holdings, investment portfolios, real estate properties, and personal effects." The silence that followed was deafening. I sat frozen, the magnitude of what had just happened hitting me in waves. Then my mother ripped off her sunglasses. "This is a mistake," she hissed. Read it again. There is no mistake, Mrs. Walker. Your father was very specific in his instructions. This is impossible. I'm his daughter, his only daughter. Mom, please, I whispered. Don't you mom me, she retorted. You knew this, didn't you? You manipulated him when he was sick and vulnerable. Emma chimed in, her voice trembling. Grandpa wouldn't do this to us. He loved us equally. Tyler remained silent, staring at his hands. Mr. Mitchell was in full possession of his faculties when he updated his will 8 months ago. He was very clear about his wishes. My mother's face twisted with anger. 8 months ago? When he was already sick. That proves it was manipulation. The meeting dissolved into chaos. My mother threatened to contest the will. Kevin made comments about family loyalty. Emma sobbed dramatically. In the parking lot afterward, my mother cornered me against my car. This is a simple solution, Sarah, she said, her voice suddenly calm. Just transfer everything to me and I'll make sure everyone gets their fair share. I need time to process this, Mom. What's there to process? It's family money. It belongs to all of us. That's not what Grandpa wanted. Her expression hardened. You have no idea what he wanted. I was his daughter for 54 years. You were just a distraction in his old age. I won't make decisions now. Don't be selfish, Sarah. Your brother needs money for college. Emma is drowning in debt. Kevin and I are behind on the mortgage again. The following days brought a flood of calls and messages. Emma called me a greedy bitch in a family chat. Kevin left voicemails about doing the right thing. My mother's friends sent messages expressing their disappointment in my character. Tyler was the only one who approached me differently. He showed up at my apartment 3 days after the will reading. I don't care about the money, he said quietly. But Mom is furious. I've never seen her like this. I just wanted to warn you. She's not going to let this go. A week later, my mother organized a family dinner. The moment I arrived, she launched into a prepared speech about family unity. Your grandfather built his business for all of us, she insisted. He never intended for one person to control everything. Then why did he write the will that way? Because you manipulated him, Emma shot back. We all know you were his favorite. Then prove it, my mother said. Sign the money over to me and I'll distribute it fairly. I can't do that. I promised Grandpa I would respect his wishes. His wishes were for the family to be taken care of, my mother shouted. And I intend to honor that, just not in the way you're demanding. The following weeks were some of the most difficult of my life. What started as direct confrontation evolved into a coordinated campaign to break me emotionally. Aunts I barely spoke to called to say how disappointed they were. Cousins sent messages asking why I hated the family. Family takes care of family became my mother's mantra, repeated in daily voicemail messages when I stopped answering her calls. The pressure came from unexpected directions. My mother got information from my work colleagues and started calling my office. My boss called me into her office after the 3rd day of these interruptions. Sarah, is everything okay at home? She asked. Take some personal days if you need to, she offered. And tell reception not to put your mother's calls through anymore. My suspicions grew, so I asked Mr. Harrison for records of my grandfather's financial support to my mother over the years. What I discovered was staggering. In the 5 years before his death, Grandpa had given my mother over $400,000, supposedly for house payments, medical bills, and educational costs. Your grandfather was very generous with your mother, Mr. Harrison observed diplomatically. Some would say, excessively so. That night, I received the most disturbing call from Kevin, his words slurred by alcohol. You think you're so smart, he growled. Your mother is having panic attacks because of you. Your mother deserves that money. She had plans for it. What plans? The house in Hilton Head, for starters. We put down a deposit 6 months ago when the old man's doctor gave us the timeline. I felt physically sick. You were spending his money before he was even dead? It was going to be ours anyway, he mumbled, until you got involved. Marcus found me curled up on the couch in the dark. My boyfriend had used his emergency key after I missed our dinner date. Talk to me, he said. Everything. I poured it all out. The inheritance. The pressure. Kevin's threatening call. Maybe I should just give them what they want, I concluded. Sarah, this isn't just about money anymore, he said gently. This is emotional abuse. Your grandfather knew this would happen. He was preparing you for it. Marcus helped me schedule an appointment with Jennifer Walsh, a lawyer who specialized in inheritance disputes. Your mother might be planning something more aggressive than just guilt trips, Jennifer said. The inheritance is significant enough that she could take formal action. She could allege undue influence, suggesting you manipulated your grandfather. Following Jennifer's advice, I started recording calls and saving all messages. I installed security cameras in my apartment after finding my mother's car parked outside one night. Your grandfather saw something in you, Marcus reminded me. The strength to handle this. Trust his judgment. 3 weeks after the will reading, I received a message from my mother. Family meeting tomorrow at 3. Time to resolve this situation once and for all. Be there. Bring your ID and banking information. We'll need it for the paperwork. The trap was set, but this time I wouldn't be the only prey. The next day dawned clear, almost mockingly cheerful for the confrontation I knew was coming. I dressed in a navy blazer, professional and composed, channeling my grandfather's business posture. Jennifer called while I was getting ready. Remember, stay calm no matter what they say. I'll be parked on the street. My mother's house looked deceptively normal when I parked in the driveway at 3 o'clock sharp. The curtains were drawn, unusual for the afternoon. I took a deep breath, grabbed my briefcase containing the documents I had gathered. The door opened before I knocked, revealing my mother's perfect hostess smile, the one that never reached her eyes. Sarah, punctual as always. Her voice was sweet as honey, another warning sign. She was wearing a designer dress I'd never seen, hair freshly colored. Everyone's waiting in the living room. The atmosphere inside was suffocating. Emma and Tyler sat rigidly on the couch, neither looking me in the eye. Kevin stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, watching me with hostility. But what confirmed my suspicions were the two strangers, middle-aged men in expensive suits, sitting in the armchairs. Sarah, my mother gestured grandly. Meet Mr. Wilson and Mr. Daniels. They're helping us resolve this unfortunate situation. I nodded politely but didn't offer my hand. I wasn't informed this would involve lawyers. Not exactly lawyers, my mother corrected smoothly. Just consultants to help with the paperwork. The only available chair was a straight-backed one positioned to face everyone else. An interrogation setup. I accepted it without comment, placing my briefcase on my lap. Would you like coffee? No, thank you. I'd like to understand the purpose of this meeting. Mr. Wilson cleared his throat, leaning forward with rehearsed concern. Sarah, your family is very worried about the burden that's been placed on you. Managing a substantial estate is complex and stressful. I appreciate the concern, but I've been working in financial management for 7 years. I'm quite capable. Of course you are, dear, my mother interrupted with a condescending smile. But this is about family unity. Your grandfather would have wanted all of us to benefit. If that were true, he would have written his will differently. Emma spoke up, her voice trembling in what I recognized as her theatrical voice. Sarah, you know Grandpa wasn't thinking clearly at the end. The medication, the pain, he wasn't himself. He was lucid until the final week. The will was updated 6 months before that. Mr. Daniels opened a leather portfolio. We've prepared a simple solution that respects your grandfather's wishes while ensuring family harmony. My mother beamed with gratitude. They've been so helpful, Sarah. This way, everyone wins. What exactly are you proposing? A voluntary redistribution, Mr. Wilson explained, removing documents. You would transfer the business holdings and investment accounts to your mother as the most experienced family member, retaining a generous portion for yourself. Say 20%. I almost laughed. And the real estate properties? Those would be liquidated, with proceeds divided among all family members, Mr. Daniels continued. Your brother has approaching college expenses, and your sister has medical needs. I looked at Tyler, who squirmed uncomfortably. What medical needs does Emma have? That's private, my mother snapped, her facade cracking. Kevin stepped forward. Look, Sarah, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These gentlemen have also prepared documents to contest the will if necessary. On what grounds? Undue influence, Mr. Wilson declared. Your grandfather was elderly and ill. You spent an unusual amount of time alone with him. A judge might find that concerning. The accusation heard exactly as intended. My mother pressed the advantage. No one wants a messy court battle, Sarah. Think about what that would do to Grandpa's reputation. I felt a momentary wave of doubt. The self-doubt must have shown on my face because my mother's expression became triumphant. We're just asking you to do the right thing, she continued. Mr. Wilson sliding a thick document across the table. Sign this today, and we can put this unfortunate situation behind us. Tyler finally spoke, his voice small. Please, Sarah. Mom says we could lose the house if this isn't resolved. The manipulation was so transparent, it restored my resolve. May I see the documents? Mr. Daniels passed them over with a satisfied smile. Take your time. It's a standard asset transfer. I accepted the papers, my expression neutral, while flipping through the first few pages. As I suspected, it was far from standard. It was a complete surrender of everything my grandfather had built. The room fell silent as I continued reading, tension mounting. My mother fidgeted with her new bracelet, another recent purchase, while Emma whispered something to Kevin. Finally, I closed the document and looked up. 5 pairs of eyes watched me expectantly. "Well," my mother prompted, "do you need a pen?" I smiled then, not the anxious smile they expected, but my grandfather's smile, the one he used when closing an advantageous deal. Before making any decision, I said calmly, "I'd like to understand something. Mom, when did you put a deposit on the house in Hilton Head?" Her face visibly paled. "What are you talking about?" "Kevin mentioned it during our last call. He said you put down a deposit 6 months ago, when Grandpa's doctor gave him his timeline." Emma shot a furious look at Kevin. He cleared his throat embarrassedly. "I never said that. I recorded the call," I replied simply. "Just as I've documented every threat, every manipulation attempt, and every lie about financial hardships while you were buying luxury items." Mr. Wilson adjusted his tie nervously. "Miss Mitchell, family disputes can get emotional. Let's focus on the documents." "Yes, let's," I agreed, reaching for my briefcase. "I have some documents of my own." That's when my mother stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to steal what should rightfully be mine." "Like you stole from Grandpa?" I asked quietly, opening my briefcase. "Never. January 15th of last year. You told Grandpa you needed $30,000 for Tyler's medical treatments. Tyler wasn't sick. The money went to your cruise and Kevin's golf club membership." I extracted the diary entry documenting this, along with a photo I'd found of my mother on that cruise. Posted on Instagram with the caption, "Best birthday gift ever." Mr. Wilson and Mr. Daniels exchanged uncomfortable glances. May 8th, you claimed Emma needed emergency dental surgery. Emma was in Cancun that weekend. She posted the photos herself. Emma had the dignity to look ashamed. I continued placing document after document, calmly exposing years of financial manipulation. Grandpa kept records of everything, Mom. Every lie, every manipulated loan, every broken promise of repayment. My mother's face had transformed from shock to fury. "How dare you? After everything I've done for you? Like using the money Grandpa gave for my college tuition on your spa retreats?" That's in here too. The consultants now looked distinctly uncomfortable. Mr. Wilson leaned toward my mother, whispering urgently. She dismissed him. "You little ungrateful—" "I think," I interrupted calmly, "this meeting is over. Unless you want me to call my real lawyer, who's waiting outside." She's particularly interested in these gentlemen, who present themselves as legal consultants while pressuring me to sign documents under false pretenses. Mr. Daniels closed his briefcase hastily. "Mrs. Walker, you didn't mention any existing litigation." "There isn't any," I clarified. "Yet." The implied threat hung in the air. My mother's plan was crumbling, and the anger in her eyes was unlike anything I'd ever seen. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Actually, it is." I took their document and handed it back. "I won't sign this, or any variation of it. Grandpa made his wishes clear, and I intend to honor them. He was my father," she almost screamed. "Everything he built should have been mine." "That's exactly why it isn't," I replied softly. "He built to last, Mom, not to be wasted." When I turned to leave, Tyler suddenly stood up. "Sarah, wait." Everyone froze. Tyler had been the silent observer throughout this entire confrontation. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't know about any of this. The lies, the manipulation. I just thought—" He looked at our mother, pain evident in his expression. "I thought Sarah was being selfish. But that's not true, is it, Mom?" Linda's expression hardened. "Sit down, Tyler." "No." His hands were shaking, but his voice remained steady. "I don't want to be part of this." To everyone's shock, he crossed the room to stand beside me. "I'm leaving with Sarah." Kevin stepped forward threateningly. "You little ungrateful." "I'd be careful what you say next," I interrupted, holding up my phone. "This entire conversation is being recorded." That stopped him cold. The consultants were already heading for the door. I looked at my mother one last time, feeling an unexpected wave of pity beneath my anger. "Goodbye, Mom." With Tyler by my side, I walked out of the house that had once been my home, leaving behind the trap that had caught its own creators. As we left, the door slammed with such force that the porch light swayed. Jennifer was already getting out of her car, alerted by my text. "Are you both okay?" she asked, looking at Tyler uncertainly. This is my brother, I explained. He's coming with us. Jennifer Walsh, Sarah's attorney. She extended her hand professionally. The door opened again, revealing my mother, face twisted with rage. Tyler, get back in this house right now. Tyler stiffened beside me but didn't turn around. I can't, Mom. Not after what I heard. They're manipulating you, she screamed. Jennifer stepped forward. Mrs. Walker, I strongly advise you to go back inside. Any further harassment will be documented. Who the hell do you think you are? I'm Miss Mitchell's legal counsel, and unlike your consultants, I'm actually a licensed attorney. My mother looked at Tyler. And you? Don't bother coming back if you leave with her. Tyler visibly flinched but held his ground. Okay. Without another word, my mother retreated inside. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a cafe several miles away. Tyler stared at his untouched coffee. I can't believe she just disowned me. Just like that. She's bluffing, I said, though I wasn't convinced. You didn't see how she was after the will reading when you weren't around. It was like she'd become obsessed. Jennifer interrupted. Tyler, did your mother discuss specific plans for the inheritance? He hesitated. She had a whole list. The Hilton Head house was just the beginning. She wanted to buy a stake in some exclusive club, get a boat, renovate the entire house. And my college tuition? I asked. Once. I asked specifically. She said you were smart enough to get scholarships and would probably try to take over Grandpa's business anyway. The casual cruelty of it stung. And your plans for college? She kept saying not to worry, that once she had control of the money, everything would be taken care of. A bitter laugh escaped him. I believed her. You weren't stupid, I assured him. You trusted your mother. Jennifer cleared her throat. We need to discuss next steps. The immediate crisis has been averted, but we should prepare for possible fallout. What do you recommend? First, file the letter and diary as supplemental documentation with the court. Second, consider a restraining order if harassment continues. A restraining order against my own mother? Only if necessary. But the recorded threats should be taken seriously. Tyler, you'll need somewhere safe to stay. I have nowhere to go. Yes, you do, I said without hesitation. You're staying with me. The relief on his face was immediate. Are you sure? Absolutely. Despite everything, you're still my little brother. Jennifer smiled. That's settled then. Now, Sarah, we should discuss your grandfather's estate. Have you thought about how you want to proceed? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on defending my inheritance that I hadn't fully considered what I would actually do with it. Grandpa wanted me to continue his legacy, I said slowly. Not just preserve it, but build upon it. The hardware stores are still profitable, Jennifer observed, but they face growing competition from big chains. You might consider diversification. Tyler leaned forward, sudden interest replacing his dejection. Grandpa always talked about expanding into eco-friendly construction supplies. He said it was the future, but didn't have the energy to retool the business model. I looked at my brother with surprise. I didn't know you paid attention to his business conversations. He shrugged, a touch of embarrassment coloring his cheeks. I didn't understand most of it, but I liked hearing him get excited about ideas. Something clicked. Tyler, what are you planning to study in college? Business administration, he replied, with a focus on sustainable entrepreneurship. Why? I exchanged a glance with Jennifer, who seemed to read my thoughts and nodded slightly in approval. Because, I said, a plan forming as I spoke, I think Grandpa would like his legacy to include both of us. Tyler's eyes widened. What are you saying? I'm saying that while I won't sign the inheritance over to Mom, I want to share it in a way that honors Grandpa's values. I reached across the table, taking his hand. How would you feel about an internship at Mitchell's Hardware while you're in college? Learning the business from the ground up, like Grandpa taught me. Are you serious? Hope flickered across his face. Completely serious. And if you prove yourself, which I know you will, there could be a place for you in the company after graduation. But what about Emma? And Mom? He asked. I sighed. Emma made her choice. As for Mom, I won't enable her self-destructive financial habits, but I won't abandon her either. We can establish a modest fund with strict conditions. Jennifer nodded approvingly. A properly structured fund would prevent misuse while providing security. We could include educational provisions for Tyler and even Emma if she changes her mind. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, I felt a sense of clarity and purpose. This wasn't just about honoring my grandfather's wishes anymore. It was about carrying forward his values in a way that could heal our family, even if that healing took years. So what happens now? Tyler asked. Now, I replied with newfound confidence, we build something that would make Grandpa proud. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of practical arrangements. Jennifer helped Tyler create a list of personal items to retrieve from our mother's house, with police escort as a precaution. I called Marcus, who immediately offered to help Tyler settle into my apartment. The weeks following the confrontation marked the beginning of a new chapter. The initial fallout was predictably difficult. My mother launched a brief, furious campaign of messages alternating between vicious accusations and tearful pleas. When those failed, she turned to social media, posting attacks about ungrateful children and family betrayal. I maintained my public silence. She wants a reaction, Marcus reminded me when the pain became overwhelming. Don't give her that satisfaction. The hardware stores demanded immediate attention. Without Grandpa's steady hand, some managers had become complacent, and sales were beginning to decline. I took leave from my marketing job and immersed myself in business operations, visiting each location. Tyler accompanied me whenever his class schedule allowed, absorbing knowledge with an enthusiasm that reminded me of myself at his age. Watching him interact with employees, ask insightful questions about inventory management, I saw glimpses of our grandfather. "You have a natural talent for this," I told him after a productive meeting with suppliers. "I just remember things Grandpa said. It helps me know what questions to ask. That's exactly what makes you good at this." 3 weeks after the confrontation, Emma reached out unexpectedly. She asked to meet at a cafe, neutral territory. I arrived first, securing a corner table where I could watch the door. Still cautious after everything that had happened, she entered hesitantly, looking smaller without our mother's dominating presence beside her. The designer clothes remained, but something in her demeanor had changed. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I wasn't sure you would. I was surprised you called." She fidgeted with the napkin, avoiding my eyes. "Mom doesn't know I'm here. She'd be furious." "How is she?" "Angry, hurt, drinking more than usual." Emma finally looked up. "She's selling the house, says she can't afford the mortgage anymore." I'd expected to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt a complicated sadness. "Where is she going?" "Kevin's sister has a rental property. It's smaller, but nice." She hesitated. "Tyler's room is still untouched. I think she's hoping he'll come back." "Has she reached out to him?" Emma shook her head. Her pride won't let her. She took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology, Sarah. I said terrible things. I believed Mom when she said you'd manipulated Grandpa. You were protecting her. I understand loyalty. It wasn't just loyalty." Her voice dropped. "I was jealous. You were always Grandpa's favorite, and I resented that. When the will was read, it felt like final confirmation that you didn't matter. But these past weeks, watching Mom spiral, seeing how she's handling things, I've been thinking about why Grandpa made the choice he did. And now I understand." This admission left me momentarily speechless. "I'm not asking for money," Emma clarified quickly. I miss my sister. And I miss Tyler. Mom is determined to cut you both off forever. But I can't do that." I reached across the table. After hesitation, she took it. "Family is complicated," I said. "But it doesn't have to be all or nothing." This meeting marked the beginning of a careful reconciliation with Emma. We agreed to keep our contact private for now, protecting her from our mother's wrath while leaving the door open for eventual healing. The legal aspects of the inheritance were finally resolving. Jennifer helped me establish 3 separate funds: an educational fund for Tyler, a modest monthly stipend for my mother — I couldn't bring myself to cut her off completely — and a charitable foundation in my grandfather's name, focused on entrepreneurial education for disadvantaged youth. The foundation in particular would have pleased him. Throughout his life, he had mentored young people with business aspirations but limited resources, offering jobs, advice, and financial support. Formalizing this support felt like the perfect tribute. 6 months after Grandpa's death, I finally moved into his house. It was a practical decision. My apartment was too small for Tyler and me long term. I kept most rooms as they were, but we converted his office into a shared workspace. We hung his portrait above the fireplace. The business began to thrive under our combined attention. Tyler's research into eco-friendly construction materials opened new market opportunities, while my marketing background helped position Mitchell's Hardware as the progressive alternative to impersonal chains. We began a modest expansion, opening a specialized showroom that attracted younger homeowners and environmentally conscious contractors. A year after the confrontation, I received an unexpected email from my mother. The subject line read, "Truce." The message was brief. "Sarah, I've spent a year being angry. It hasn't changed anything except make me more bitter. Emma tells me the business is doing well. She says Tyler is thriving in college. I miss my children. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. No lawyers, no demands. Just talk. Mom. After discussing with Tyler, Emma, and Marcus, I agreed to meet her at a restaurant. She arrived punctually, looking older, but more composed than during our last encounter. The designer clothes had disappeared, replaced by a simple blouse. Her expression when she saw me was cautious, but not hostile. "Thank you for coming," she said. "How are you, Mom?" "Getting by. The rental is actually nice, less to clean. Kevin and I are taking time apart." That was news. "I'm sorry to hear that." She shrugged. "It's been coming for a while. Your grandfather used to say Kevin brought out the worst in me. I'm starting to think he was right about that too." The acknowledgement that Grandpa was right about anything money-related was surprising progress. "I'm seeing someone," she continued, eyes fixed on her water glass. "A therapist. Emma's idea. It's helping me understand some things about myself, about why I always felt so empty, no matter how much I acquired." Our conversation that day wasn't a magical reconciliation. Years of dysfunctional patterns couldn't be undone in a single lunch, but it was a beginning. She asked thoughtful questions about the business, listened when I explained about the foundation, and seemed genuinely pleased when I showed photos of Tyler's Dean's List certificate. Before we parted, she said something that stayed with me. "Robert would be proud of you, Sarah. Not because of what you did with the money, but because of who you became despite how difficult I made it." It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. The path to family healing remains long and uncertain. Some days bring progress, others trigger old patterns. My mother and I maintain careful boundaries, but the open hostility has faded. She even attended the grand opening of our newest store, staying quietly in the back during my speech, but remaining for cake afterward. Tyler graduates next year, ready to assume a full-time role in the company. Emma, inspired by the foundation's work, started volunteering at a women's shelter and talked about returning to school for social work. And Marcus, well, the ring he put on my finger last month suggests we'll be building our future together. As for me, I've finally made peace with my grandfather's choice. The inheritance wasn't just about money or business acumen. It was about values, about building instead of consuming, about using resources to create something meaningful that survives us. In the final entry of the diary, Grandpa wrote that he believed I had what my mother never developed: strength of character. For a long time, that seemed like too heavy a compliment to accept. Now I understand it wasn't a compliment, but recognition of something he had observed over years of watching me grow and make difficult choices. Standing up to family pressure was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But through that painful process, I discovered my own capacity for both firmness and compassion, for honoring the past while building something new. That's the real inheritance, not the money or the business, but the understanding that true wealth lies in what we create, what we share, and what we leave for others. If you're facing a similar family conflict over money or inheritance, remember that holding your ground doesn't mean closing your heart. Boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges that allow healthy relationships. Today, when I look out the window of the office I share with Tyler, I see not just the empire my grandfather built, but the future we're creating together. Tyler is working on a business plan for a new line of sustainable products. His passion reminds me of Grandpa himself. On the wall, Grandpa's portrait watches with those kind eyes. And in the corner of the desk, in a simple frame, is the last page of his diary with that note in the margin. "The true measure of wealth isn't what you have, but what you do with it. Make it count, Sarah." Every day I strive to honor those words. It's not always easy, and I don't always get it right. But I know I'm building something that will last, something that would make my grandfather smile with pride. The money my grandfather left me was significant, but the real gift was the opportunity to discover who I really was when tested. He saw in me a strength I didn't even know I possessed. And by entrusting me with his legacy, he gave me the chance to become the person he believed I could be. The inheritance I received wasn't just financial. It was a lesson about integrity, about making difficult decisions, about the difference between being generous and being used. It was about learning that sometimes loving someone means not giving them what they want, but helping them become who they're capable of being. My grandfather gave me more than money. He gave me an example of how to live with purpose, how to build something lasting, and how to stay true to your values even when it's difficult. That's a legacy I hope to pass forward. In the end, I discovered that true inheritance isn't about what you receive. It's about what you become in the process of earning it. Robert James Mitchell gave me more than a fortune. He gave me the opportunity to discover my own strength, and that's a gift no amount of money can buy. At dinner, my son said out loud, "At least Mom's new husband isn't a loser like you." I didn't say anything. The next morning, his car had disappeared and his college account was frozen. That night, my ex called me in panic. This happened about a month ago, and honestly, I'm still processing the whole situation. I never thought I'd be dealing with this type of drama at my age, but here we are. I'm 45 years old and divorced from my ex-wife Sarah about 3 years ago. We have a son together named Taylor, who is 19 years old and in his second year of college. The divorce was complicated, and Sarah made sure to poison Taylor against me as much as possible during the process. Sarah remarried last year to a guy named Brad who works in sales and thinks he's hot stuff because he drives a BMW and wears expensive suits. Taylor absolutely adores Brad and constantly compares me to him in ways that are not at all flattering to me. The thing is, I'm actually not doing badly in life. I work as an electrical engineer and make good money. I own my house outright and have decent savings. But I'm not flashy like Brad. I drive a practical sedan and dress normally. Sarah has convinced Taylor that this makes me a loser. During the divorce, Sarah fought me on everything, including child support and custody. She wanted maximum support and minimum visitation rights for me. The court didn't see it that way, and we ended up with shared custody and reasonable support payments. Part of the divorce agreement was that I would pay for Taylor's college expenses, including tuition, room, and board. This was actually my idea because I wanted to make sure Taylor had opportunities no matter what happened with the marriage. Sarah agreed to this arrangement. I've been paying approximately $30,000 per year for Taylor's college costs. Private university is expensive, but I wanted him to have the best education possible. I set up automatic payments for tuition and gave Taylor a credit card for other school expenses. Taylor has been increasingly disrespectful to me since the divorce. Sarah encourages this behavior, and Brad does nothing to stop it. Family dinners when Taylor visits me have become exercises in patience, while he makes constant comparisons between Brad and me. According to Taylor, Brad is more successful, more fun, and more generous than me. Brad takes Taylor on expensive trips and buys him designer clothes. Meanwhile, I'm just the guy who pays for his education and provides a boring, stable home environment. Taylor wanted a car for college, and Sarah demanded that I buy him one. The divorce agreement didn't specifically mention a car, but Taylor kept pushing for one. Eventually, I agreed and bought him a decent used Honda that was reliable and appropriate for a college student. Taylor wasn't happy with the Honda. He wanted something flashier like Brad's BMW. I explained that a reliable used car was more practical for college and that he should be grateful to have any car. Taylor reluctantly accepted it, but complained constantly. The situation had been gradually getting worse for months. Every phone conversation became a list of the incredible things Brad had done or bought. Every weekend Taylor spent with me felt more like an obligation than quality father-son time. I tried to plan fun activities, but Taylor always found a way to compare everything to what he did with Brad. I remember one particular occasion a few weeks before the dinner incident, when I tried to take Taylor fishing. It was something we used to do when he was younger, and I thought it might be a good opportunity to reconnect. But throughout the entire trip, Taylor was complaining that Brad had a better boat, and that his fishing trips on the lake were much more exciting. I couldn't enjoy even 5 minutes without Brad being mentioned. Sarah had also been intensifying her campaign against me. Every time Taylor came from her house, he brought new stories about how great Brad was. Sarah was clearly feeding this narrative, probably to make me feel bad or to justify her new relationship. What hurt me most was that I had been a good father. I never missed a baseball game, never missed a parent-teacher conference, and was always there when Taylor needed me. But now, suddenly, all of that didn't matter because Brad had more money to spend on flashy things. It was as if 18 years of dedicated parenting had been erased because I chose to drive a Honda Accord instead of a BMW. Recently, Taylor had been staying with me every other weekend according to our custody arrangement. These visits had become increasingly tense because Taylor spent most of the time talking about how great Brad was and how much better his life was at his mom's house. The atmosphere in my house during these weekends had become almost toxic. Taylor would arrive on Friday night with an attitude, acting as if being in my house was a punishment. I tried to make conversation during dinner, asking him about his classes or his friends, but his answers were short and uninterested. It was clear he'd rather be anywhere else. What really frustrated me was the hypocrisy of it all. Taylor lived comfortably thanks to my financial support, but acted as if I were a burden in his life. His $30,000 per year tuition, his dorm room, his meal plan, his books, his clothes, all of that came from my hard work. But somehow in his mind, I was the villain of the story. Last month, Taylor came for his regular weekend visit. I had planned to take him to dinner at a nice restaurant because I wanted us to have quality time together. I thought maybe we could have a conversation without all the drama for once. I chose an Italian restaurant that I knew he liked, one where we had gone several times when he was younger. It was a place with good memories, and I hoped that might help improve his attitude. I made reservations for 7 p.m. and told him to dress nicely because we were going somewhere special. When we arrived at the restaurant, Taylor seemed to be in a better mood than usual. He commented that he liked the place and even smiled when the waiter took us to our table. For a moment, I felt hope that we could have a pleasant evening together. Dinner started well. We talked about his classes and his summer plans. Taylor seemed to be in a good mood, and I was hopeful that we could spend a nice evening together. That lasted about 30 minutes. He told me about an engineering project he was doing for one of his classes, and for the first time in months, he seemed genuinely excited about something related to his studies. I was proud to hear about his work and asked him questions about the technical details. For a few moments, it felt like the old days, when we could have real conversations about things that mattered to him. But then, Taylor started talking about a vacation that Sarah and Brad were planning to take him on during spring break. Some expensive trip to Europe that sounded like it cost more than most people earn in several months. Taylor went on and on about how excited he was. He talked about the places they would visit, the hotels they would stay in, the experiences Brad had planned. The way he talked about Brad was as if he were some kind of hero or mentor, not just his mother's new husband. I made the mistake of asking if Brad was paying for this trip, or if it was coming out of Taylor's college fund that I provide. Taylor got defensive and said it wasn't my business how Brad spent his money. He said Brad was generous, unlike some people. The conversation went downhill from there. Taylor started comparing Brad's generosity to my supposed stinginess. He brought up the car topic again and said Brad would have bought him something nice instead of an old Honda. He said Brad understood what Taylor needed, while I just focused on being practical. I tried to change the subject, but Taylor was on a roll. He started listing all the ways Brad was supposedly better than me. Brad was more successful. Brad was more fun. Brad was more understanding. According to Taylor, Brad was everything a father should be. What hurt me most was the unfairness of his comparisons. Brad had been in Taylor's life for less than 2 years, and during that time, he'd only had to be the fun guy. He hadn't been up all night when Taylor had a fever as a child. He hadn't spent hours helping him with his math homework. He hadn't been there for all the ups and downs of raising him. Brad had only had to show up with expensive gifts and exciting adventures. Meanwhile, I had been paying for everything important in Taylor's life: his education, his housing, his food, his health insurance. But somehow that didn't count because it didn't come wrapped in expensive gift paper. I tried to explain to Taylor that there were different types of support and that the financial stability I provided was an important form of care, but he didn't want to listen. In his mind, it was all about who could make the biggest gestures and who had more money to spend on fun. The tension at the table kept rising. Other diners began to notice we were having an argument. Taylor was raising his voice, and I was trying to stay calm, but I could feel my patience running out. I had come to this restaurant hoping to reconnect with my son, and instead I was being attacked and publicly humiliated. The last straw came when Taylor said, loud enough for other diners to hear, "At least Mom's new husband isn't a loser like you." He said it with this smug expression, as if he were proud of putting me in my place. I sat there for a moment, just looking at him. Other people in the restaurant had heard what he said and were looking at us. I felt humiliated and angry, but didn't want to make a scene in public. The silence that followed was deafening. Taylor seemed to realize he had crossed a line, but his expression showed more defiance than regret. It was as if he were testing how far he could go, how much abuse he could make me swallow before I finally reacted. I just asked for the check, and we left in silence. The waiter who had been serving our table all night had clearly heard the comment. He gave me a sympathetic look when I handed him my credit card. Even a stranger could see how inappropriate Taylor's behavior had been. The ride home was uncomfortable. Taylor seemed to realize he had crossed the line, but didn't apologize. I dropped him off at his dorm and told him I'd see him in 2 weeks for his next scheduled visit. He just shrugged and walked away. That night I sat in my house thinking about what Taylor had said. All the way home, his words echoed in my head. Loser. That's how his own son saw me. After 18 years of sacrifices, after working overtime to pay for his education, after being there for every important moment of his life, I was a loser in his eyes. I realized I had been enabling his disrespectful behavior by continuing to provide financial support while he treated me like garbage. Something needed to change. I had been so focused on being the good, stable father that I had forgotten to teach Taylor about respect and consequences. I spent most of the night awake thinking about all the ways I had failed as a father. Not by not providing for Taylor. I had done that excessively, but by not teaching him basic values about how to treat people who love and support you. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't had in years. I knew exactly what I had to do. I made some phone calls. First, I called the bank and canceled Taylor's credit card. The customer service representative asked if there had been fraudulent activity, and I explained that I was simply removing an authorized user from my account. It was a simple process since I was the primary account holder. Then I called his university's treasurer's office and asked them to put a hold on processing any new charges to his student account until I could review them personally. Since I was the account holder and payer, this was within my rights. The university official explained that this would mean Taylor couldn't buy meals on the meal plan or access other services until the hold was lifted. Finally, I called the auto insurance company and removed Taylor's car from my policy. I also drove to Taylor's dorm and used my spare key to retrieve the Honda. It was parked in the student lot, and I simply drove it home. Since the car was registered and titled in my name and Taylor was only an authorized user, I had every legal right to retrieve it. Taylor had no ownership claim on the vehicle. As I drove the car back to my house, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. I didn't want to be doing this. I didn't want to be in a situation where I had to teach my 19-year-old son about consequences this way. But I had reached a point where words were no longer enough. By noon, Taylor's college account was frozen and his car had disappeared. His credit card stopped working when he tried to buy lunch. I imagined he was having a very confusing day trying to figure out what was happening. I didn't call Taylor to explain what I had done. I figured he was smart enough to put the pieces together eventually. If he wanted to treat me like a loser, then he could see what life was like without the loser's financial support. Later, while I was in my home office, I began to have doubts about what I had done. Part of me wondered if I had been too harsh, if I had overreacted to a young man's hurtful words. But then I remembered the expression on his face when he called me a loser, the way he had said it so casually, as if it were an accepted fact. I also thought about all the other moments of disrespect I had tolerated, the constant comparisons with Brad, the complaints about my gifts, the way he acted as if being in my house was a punishment. Taylor had been pushing boundaries for months, and I had been too worried about keeping the peace to establish real consequences. That night, my phone started ringing. First, it was Taylor calling, but I didn't answer. Then it was Sarah calling repeatedly. I let those calls go to voicemail too. I wasn't ready to deal with her drama yet. Sarah left several voicemails, each more frantic than the last. The first one was angry, demanding to know why Taylor's accounts were frozen. By the third voicemail, she was practically begging me to call her back because Taylor was having a breakdown. I could hear Taylor crying in the background of one of the messages. The reality of his situation had finally hit him. Without a car, without a credit card, without access to his college account, Taylor was experiencing for the first time what it meant not to have my financial support. I finally answered when Sarah called for the 6th time. She was hysterical, asking what I had done and why I was punishing Taylor. She said he was crying and didn't understand why his car and credit card weren't working. I explained very calmly that Taylor had made it clear he thought I was a loser who didn't deserve his respect. Since he felt that way, I decided he no longer needed financial support from someone he considered worthless. Sarah was speechless for a moment. Then she started screaming about the divorce agreement and my obligation to pay for Taylor's education. I reminded her that respect and basic human decency weren't too much to ask in return for $30,000 a year. Sarah tried to argue that Taylor was just a teenager and didn't mean what he had said. I pointed out that Taylor was 19 years old and in college. He was old enough to understand that actions have consequences and that you shouldn't bite the hand that feeds you. Then Sarah tried a different approach and started crying about how this would ruin Taylor's education. She said he couldn't afford college without my help, and that I was destroying his future over hurt feelings. I told her Taylor should have thought about that before calling me a loser in public. The conversation ended with Sarah hanging up on me after I refused to immediately restore Taylor's accounts. I knew she would call me back once she realized I was serious about this situation. Taylor tried to call me several more times that night, but I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to talk to him until he was prepared to have a real conversation about respect and consequences. The text messages I received from Taylor that night were revealing. At first, they were angry and confused. Why did you do this? This isn't fair. I need my car to get to classes. But as the hours passed and the reality of his situation sank in, the tone changed. The later messages showed more panic. Dad, please answer. I don't understand what's happening. I can't buy food. My card isn't working. How am I supposed to get to work without a car? For the first time, Taylor was experiencing the real consequences of his actions. The next day, Sarah called back with Brad on the line. Brad tried to play peacemaker and suggested maybe we could work something out. He said Taylor had learned his lesson and was very sorry for what happened at dinner. I told Brad that if he thought Taylor had learned his lesson, then he was welcome to take over paying for Taylor's college expenses. There was a long silence on the phone. Apparently, Brad's generosity had limits when it came to actually spending his own money. For all these months, it had been easy for him to be the fun, generous stepfather when someone else was paying all the important expenses. But faced with the prospect of paying $30,000 a year for Taylor's education, Brad's true nature came to light. Sarah came back on and started threatening legal action. She said the divorce agreement required me to pay for Taylor's education, and that I couldn't just stop because my feelings were hurt. I told her to have her lawyer call my lawyer. The truth is, the divorce agreement did require me to pay for Taylor's education, but it said nothing about tolerating abuse in exchange for that support. I was willing to argue in court that respect and basic decency were reasonable expectations for continued financial assistance. Over the next few days, I received calls from several family members who had heard about the situation. My mother called concerned about Taylor, but also understanding my position. She had noticed Taylor's disrespectful behavior toward me at family gatherings and had privately commented that something needed to change. My older sister was divided. On one hand, she was worried about Taylor's education and thought maybe I had been too harsh. On the other hand, she had witnessed firsthand how Taylor spoke to me and admitted that if one of her children had spoken to her that way, she would have reacted similarly. Some people thought I was being too harsh, while others said it was about time Taylor faced some consequences for his behavior. My brother said he supported my decision completely. He had witnessed Taylor's disrespectful behavior toward me and thought the kid needed a reality check. My younger brother shared a story about his own teenage son who had been acting similarly, though not as extreme. He told me he had been struggling with when and how to set boundaries, and that my situation had helped him realize that waiting too long only made things worse. I also received some unexpected calls from colleagues and friends who had heard about the situation through the grapevine. A coworker whose son had gone through a similar phase told me how they had handled the situation and assured me that setting firm boundaries had ultimately improved his relationship with his son. Taylor finally called me directly 3 days after I froze his accounts. He was crying and said he was sorry for what he had said at dinner. He begged me to restore his car and credit card and promised he would be more respectful in the future. The conversation lasted almost an hour. Taylor sounded genuinely broken and remorseful. He told me about how he had had to borrow money from friends for food, how he had had to walk miles to get to his part-time job, how he had had to explain to his friends why he suddenly didn't have a car. But what impacted me most was when Taylor told me he had been thinking a lot about our relationship and realized he had been taking me for granted. He said he had never really considered everything I did for him because it had always been there as a constant in his life. I told Taylor that apologies were easy, but actions mattered more. I told him that if he wanted my financial support, then he needed to show me genuine respect, not just when he needed something, but all the time. This meant no more comparisons with Brad and no more insults about my life choices. Taylor agreed to my conditions and seemed genuinely sorry for his behavior. I told him I would think about restoring his accounts, but that things were going to be different from now on. He would have to earn back my trust and financial support. After talking to Taylor, I decided to give him one more chance. I restored his college account so he could continue with his education, but kept the car and credit cards suspended. I told him he could earn those back by showing consistent, respectful behavior over time. I also had a conversation with Sarah about boundaries. I made it clear that if she continued to encourage Taylor's disrespectful behavior toward me, then I would permanently withdraw my financial support. She needed to choose between her revenge against me and Taylor's education. Sarah wasn't happy with this ultimatum, but realized I was serious. She agreed to stop undermining my relationship with Taylor and to encourage him to be more respectful. Whether she'll follow through remains to be seen. The conversation with Sarah was particularly interesting because for the first time in years I had her full attention. Throughout the divorce process, and after I had felt like my words didn't matter, like my feelings and perspectives were irrelevant. But when Taylor's education was at stake, suddenly Sarah was very interested in what I had to say. I established clear rules. No more disparaging comments about me in front of Taylor. No more encouraging comparisons between Brad and me, and no more undermining my parental authority. I told her that if Taylor came home after being with her and disrespected me, I would assume she had been feeding that attitude. Sarah initially tried to argue that she couldn't control what Taylor thought or said, but I pointed out that she had done a very good job influencing his opinions about me for the past 3 years. If she could make him hate me, she could also encourage him to respect me. The whole situation actually improved my relationship with Taylor in some ways. The shock of losing his car and credit card made him realize how much he depended on my financial support. He has been more respectful during our conversations and has stopped making constant comparisons with Brad. The following weeks were an adjustment period for everyone. Taylor had to learn to live on a much tighter budget. He could no longer go out to eat whenever he wanted or buy things impulsively. He had to be more strategic about when and where he spent money. His friends noticed the changes too. Taylor told me later that it had been humiliating to have to explain why he suddenly didn't have a car or why he couldn't pay when they went out. Some of his friends were understanding, but others were less considerate. And Taylor experienced for the first time how social status can change when your financial circumstances change. Taylor is still living without a car and using cash for expenses. I've told him he can earn back these privileges by consistently showing respect and appreciation for what I provide. So far, he seems to be making an effort. Our phone conversations have changed dramatically. Where before Taylor seemed bored or resentful when we talked, now he seems more interested in maintaining a good relationship with me. He asks me about my work, about my weekend plans, about things he had never shown interest in before. He has started thanking me for things he used to take for granted. When I restored his college account, he called me specifically to thank me. When I sent him money for textbooks, I received a detailed text message explaining exactly what he needed the money for and thanking me for my support. Brad has been notably quiet since he learned that his generosity would be put to the test if I stopped supporting Taylor. It turns out it's easy to be the fun, generous stepfather when someone else is paying all the major expenses. Brad's true colors showed when he was faced with real financial responsibility. What really bothered me about Brad wasn't that he was rich or successful. I respect people who work hard and succeed. What bothered me was his willingness to undermine my relationship with Taylor while benefiting from my financial support. It was hypocritical of him to criticize my lifestyle while Taylor lived comfortably thanks to my work. Now that Brad understands, he might have to pay for the lifestyle Taylor had been living. His attitude toward me has changed. He's no longer the arrogant antagonist he used to be. In fact, in our most recent phone conversation, he almost sounded conciliatory, as if he finally understood that I wasn't the enemy in this situation. The experience taught me that financial support should come with expectations of basic respect. I had been so focused on providing for Taylor that I forgot to require that he treat me with decency. As a father, it was my mistake and it needed to be corrected. I've had time to reflect on the mistakes I made as a father. Not the mistakes of not providing enough. I had done that excessively. But the mistakes of not teaching appropriate boundaries and behavioral expectations. I had been so worried about being the good father after the divorce that I had allowed Taylor to treat me in ways I would never have tolerated from anyone else. During the weeks that followed, I began to establish other boundaries too. I told Taylor that if he wanted to talk to me on the phone, he needed to give me his full attention. No social media or watching TV while we talked. I told him that when he came to visit me, I expected him to participate in family activities instead of locking himself in his room complaining. At first, Taylor resisted these new boundaries. He had been used to being able to ignore me while still receiving financial benefits. But when he realized I was serious about consequences, he began to adapt. A turning point came about a month after the original incident. Taylor asked me if he could come home one weekend, which wasn't his scheduled time because he wanted to talk to me about something important. This was completely different from his previous behavior, where visits felt like obligations he had to fulfill. When Taylor arrived that weekend, he sat me down and had a real conversation with me about how he had been feeling. He explained that he had been angry with me about the divorce and had been taking that anger out on me in ways that weren't fair. He said he had used Brad as a way to hurt me because he knew the comparisons pained me. It was the first time Taylor had been completely honest with me about his emotions in years. He admitted he had been resentful of me for not fighting harder for the marriage, although he intellectually understood that the divorce hadn't been entirely my fault. He had been carrying this anger for years and had been directing it toward me in destructive ways. He also told me about the pressure he had been feeling from Sarah to take sides in the divorce. He said he had felt like he had to choose between his parents and that it had been easier to blame me because I wasn't trying to manipulate him emotionally the same way Sarah had been doing. This conversation was painful but necessary. It helped me understand that Taylor's behavior hadn't just been disrespect. It had been about unprocessed emotional pain and divided loyalties. But I also made it clear to him that understanding the reasons behind his behavior didn't excuse it. I explained to Taylor that the divorce had been difficult for everyone, including me. I told him about some of the struggles I had faced as a single father, the nights I had spent worrying about him, and how his words and actions had affected me. It was the first time I had been vulnerable with Taylor about my own feelings. We also talked about Brad and the role he had been playing in our conflict. Taylor admitted he had been using Brad as a weapon against me, comparing me unfavorably to him because he knew it would bother me. He acknowledged that this had been unfair because Brad and I had completely different roles in his life. I explained that I had no problem with Taylor having a good relationship with Brad. In fact, I encouraged it. But that relationship didn't have to come at the expense of our own father-son bond. I told him there was room in his life for both of us, as long as there was mutual respect. Over the following weeks, Taylor began to follow through on his promises of more respectful behavior. Our phone conversations became more substantial. Instead of superficial updates about his life, we began having real discussions about his goals, his struggles, and his plans for the future. Taylor also began showing genuine interest in my life. He asked me about my work, my hobbies, and even my dating. It was refreshing to have a son who seemed to see me as a complete person rather than just a financial provider. He has started thanking me for things he used to take for granted. When I restored his college account, he called me specifically to thank me. When I sent him money for textbooks, I received a detailed text message explaining exactly what he needed the money for and thanking me for my support. About 6 weeks after the original incident, Taylor asked me if he could earn back his car by showing me he had changed. I told him I was pleased with his progress, but that I wanted to see consistency over a longer period before fully restoring his privileges. Taylor accepted this without complaint, which was another sign of his growth. The old Taylor would have argued or gotten moody. The new Taylor seemed to understand that earning back trust took time and consistent effort. I decided to implement a system where Taylor could earn back privileges gradually. I told him that if he continued showing respect and appreciation for another month, I would give him back the car, but with restrictions. He would have to keep his grades above a certain level, he would have to continue being respectful, and he would have to contribute to the cost of insurance with money from his part-time job. This structure gave Taylor clear goals to work toward and gave me a way to reward good behavior while maintaining expectations. It also taught him that privileges come with responsibilities, something that had been missing from his upbringing. Meanwhile, my relationship with Sarah also improved, though it remained tense. Once she realized I was serious about withdrawing financial support if she continued to undermine my relationship with Taylor, she changed her approach. She no longer made disparaging comments about me in front of Taylor, and even went so far as to encourage him to be more respectful toward me. Sarah and I had a long phone conversation one night where we finally talked honestly about how the divorce had affected Taylor. She admitted she had been so angry with me that she had lost sight of what was best for our son. She acknowledged that encouraging Taylor's disrespect toward me hadn't been productive for anyone. She didn't apologize directly for her behavior, but she acknowledged that we needed to work together as parents instead of using Taylor as a pawn in our conflicts. It was a small but important step toward a more functional co-parenting relationship. Brad also adjusted his behavior. He stopped making comments about my lifestyle choices or parenting decisions. In the few interactions we had, he was polite and respectful. I think he realized that antagonizing me wasn't in his best interest, especially considering Taylor depended on my financial support. Some people might think I was too harsh, but I disagree. Taylor is an adult who needs to understand that relationships are reciprocal. You can't treat someone badly and then expect them to continue supporting you financially just because they're related to you. The experience also taught me some important lessons about parenting after divorce. I realized I had been so focused on not being the bad father that I had lost sight of the importance of teaching boundaries and consequences. I had been compensating for divorce guilt by being too permissive with Taylor. I also learned that financial support without expectations of respect can actually be harmful to young adults. Taylor had been living in a bubble where his actions had no real consequences. By withdrawing my support, I forced him to confront the reality that his choices affect his relationships and opportunities. Looking back, I wish I had established boundaries earlier instead of letting the disrespect continue for so long. But better late than never. Taylor learned that actions have consequences, and I learned that providing financial support doesn't mean accepting abuse. The outcome has been positive overall. Taylor is more respectful. Sarah is less inclined to undermine me. And Brad has learned that his stepfather role comes with limitations. Sometimes tough love is the only way to reset unhealthy family dynamics. About 3 months after the original incident, Taylor had demonstrated enough consistent change for me to feel comfortable restoring most of his privileges. I gave him back the car, but with the condition that he had to pay for his own insurance and gas. I also gave him a new credit card, but with a much lower limit and the understanding that it would be removed immediately if he abused it. Taylor accepted these conditions with gratitude rather than complaints. This response showed me more than any words could that he had truly learned from the experience. The old Taylor would have argued about the restrictions or acted like it was unfair. The new Taylor seemed to understand that he had earned these privileges back, and that keeping them required continued responsible behavior. Our weekends together were completely transformed. Instead of Taylor counting the minutes until he could leave, he began planning activities we could do together. We started going fishing again, something we hadn't done in years. We also started working on house projects together, which gave him opportunities to learn practical skills while we spent quality time. What impressed me most was when Taylor started inviting his friends to the house. He had spent years acting like being at my house was a punishment, but now he seemed comfortable bringing his social world into my space. His friends were respectful and polite, and Taylor had clearly spoken well of me to them. One night, while Taylor and some of his friends were watching a movie in my living room, I overheard a conversation that made me smile. One of his friends had commented on how cool my house was, and Taylor had responded with pride about some of the improvements we had made together. It was the first time in years I had heard Taylor speak positively about his time with me. The car is still in my garage from the early days after the incident, but no longer as a symbol of punishment. Now it's a reminder of how much things had changed. Taylor asks about when he can earn back the privilege of having it on campus, and I tell him he can have it back when he's shown 6 months of consistent and respectful behavior. So far, he's making progress, but he still has work to do. The system I established has worked well. Taylor understands that his privileges are directly connected to his behavior. When he's respectful and responsible, he receives more freedom and support. When he makes mistakes or reverts to old patterns, there are immediate but fair consequences. The whole situation was a wake-up call for everyone involved. Taylor learned that financial support isn't unconditional. Sarah learned that her actions affect Taylor's future, and I learned that setting boundaries is necessary even with family members. I hope Taylor takes this lesson seriously and becomes a better person because of it. He has potential to be successful and kind, but he needed to learn that treating people well is as important as achieving your goals. The relationship between Taylor and Brad has also improved paradoxically. Once Taylor stopped using him as a weapon against me, he was able to develop a more authentic relationship with his stepfather. He no longer feels the need to exaggerate how great Brad is to hurt me, so he can genuinely appreciate the positive qualities Brad brings to his life. Brad, for his part, seems to have developed more respect for my role in Taylor's life. When faced with the reality of what it actually costs to support a college student, he gained new appreciation for the sacrifices I've been making. Our interactions are now cordial, even respectful. This experience also strengthened my confidence as a father. For years after the divorce, I had been doubting my parenting decisions, wondering if I was too strict or not fun enough compared to Taylor's new family. But establishing and maintaining firm boundaries showed me that I had good parental instincts. I had just been too scared to use them. Looking toward the future, I'm optimistic about my relationship with Taylor. We've built a foundation of mutual respect that didn't exist before. Taylor understands that I value our relationship enough to fight for it, even when that means making difficult choices. And I've learned that sometimes the greatest love you can show is setting firm boundaries. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is responsibility. Taylor needed to learn that his actions have consequences and that relationships require mutual respect. It was a painful choice for both of us, but necessary. The transformation hasn't been perfect. Taylor still makes occasional mistakes, and I still have to remind him about expectations and boundaries. But the fundamental difference is that he now understands there are standards he must meet and real consequences if he doesn't. More importantly, Taylor has begun to see our relationship as something valuable worth protecting. He no longer takes my support and presence in his life for granted. I've learned that relationships require effort and respect from both parties. This experience has made me a better father, I believe, and has helped Taylor become a better young adult. It wasn't the path I would have chosen, but sometimes the most important lessons come from the most difficult moments. Taylor has the potential to be successful and kind, and this experience helped him understand that treating people well is as important as any other goal he might have in life.